Today we're going to talk about IOTA, a permissionless distributed ledger for the new economy. What that really means, let's kind of go into it about what makes it interesting, what makes it not so interesting, and kind of what we're thinking about trading. So when we're talking about IOTA, it's the native currency, the ticker, on a network designed for the Internet of Things. The IOTA team kind of aims to solve the scaling problems in the current generation blockchains by implementing what they call the tangle, or a directed acyclic graph, shortened DAG. With IOTA, there are no dedicated miners involved at all. So kind of what we're showing here is what they use to call the tangle. And unlike Bitcoin or the vast majority of other blockchains, in the place of miners, with each transaction that is made on the IOTA network, the original creator of the transaction must verify two other transactions on the network. So in that way, miners and users are kind of the same thing, right? Every user needs to mine two other transactions in order to send their own transaction. So each transaction requires that very small amount of proof of work to be done on their part in order to even participate in this network. So there are no fees in the traditional sense, like when you're expecting to pay for gas on the Ethereum network, or you have to pay a little bit of Bitcoin to send Bitcoin. You're paying with a small amount of your processing power, right, in return for this secured network. So when you look at like the transaction process, so for each new transaction, it kind of creates this new block in what they call the tangle, which is kind of shown right here. So for this new block to even become part of this network, the creator has to verify two network selected blocks, kind of how we just went over. This lack of traditional like fees structure allows for kind of the smaller transactions, like the micro transactions that would kind of be needed for like the Internet of Things, right? You need those very, very minuscule payments and micro payments, nano payments, whatever you want to call them. And the team's kind of trying to, is aiming to be that main facilitator of these like just increasingly smaller and smaller payments to kind of enable for that whole internet connected devices so they can all talk to each other, right? But with something like this, so you have a blockchain that goes, pretty much block to block here, and then you have what they call as a tangle. And in this process, there's something called the coordinator, right? And this is kind of a little heated thing because for the tangle to work, there needs to be a coordinator initially. So the not so interesting thing about IOTA is this coordinator. It's kind of a point of centralization. In the transaction process, when there's two unverified blocks, when they're chosen, it's done so by a very specific algorithm. When all the users on the network follow this, the tangle of blocks kind of continue in the same direction, right? They're not spreading out up and down. They're kind of going in that same direction because it just creates that more, secure over time, kind of like the blockchain. It goes in a single direction. So each proof of work computation, so that small amount of proof of work you have to do for each, two on each transaction, kind of just protects the network as the tree grows in the same direction, just outwards in the same direction. However, the network's only secure as a single bad entity doesn't amass, like, I think what it's at about 33% of hash power last time I looked. So the co-founder of co-founder of IOTA has talked about the problem in depth, right? I mean, because the coordinator, obviously there's nothing they're trying to hide. It's just, even the co-founder has stated that there is a scenario where an attacker controls over 1/3 of the network's processing power. And, you can, allowing them to create fraudulent transactions. And, this isn't FUD or anything because Bitcoin has the same, any proof of work algorithm has the same 51% attack. But 1/3 is less than that, right? So a coordinator is currently being leveraged by the network to protect against this type of attack. And the IOTA Foundation is actually in complete control of this coordinator node. It's one node on there that kind of controls which direction this tree is going to start growing. So the coordinator node creates its own transaction every minute and verifies two others in the process. So the users in the network can check the coordinator's unique signature on the block indirectly through the tangle to ensure the validity of the selected transaction. So all the way at the end of the block, you can read the unique signature on the tangle that says the coordinator has verified a transaction way in the back and it's been indirectly connected. And at the current size of the network, bad actors could submit false transaction, and there's really no way to know otherwise. Yet, with the ability to look for that coordinator node, indirectly, a transaction can be deemed valid because you can see, you can actually verify that with that signature. So as the network kind of scales and grows, there are plans to reduce that the coordinator node. It's kind of just going to go away eventually. It's just not to that point yet. So the network could, will theoretically be able to protect itself against proportionally to the user generated transaction volume. So there's more volume, more secure it's going to be. So really, when you're talking to look at all these different unique features, a lot of them do make sense, but like zero fee transactions, you have to realize that you're not really zero fees in the traditional sense, but you're really going to be paying for processing power, and that does cost something, right? Yeah, low resource requirements. So kind of when you're taking a look at all this together, the directed acyclic graph structured networks kind of create potential solutions to problems like plaguing the rest of the space, right? Bitcoin's, you say it's slow, everything else copies a proof of work slow. You can kind of create, kind of change some of the variables like Litecoin to increase the amount of blocks and make it a little bit faster, but you're not going to get anywhere close to, directed acyclic graph on the main chain, right? But, Bitcoin is creating, second layer solutions. This is trying to create a new structure for the base layer. So they promise, the speed, the scalability, zero fee transactions, concepts such as like distributed computing, data storage. You have like Pearl Oyster or whatever it changed to now, storing information on the tangle because it's, relatively cheap. And you can like, there's a few different ways you can like, when you're taking a look at feeless or very reduced fees and speed, you can kind of think about this like new economy where your resources are managed and transferred, and really the Internet of Things isn't shrinking, so there needs to be some sort of and truly, if the Internet of Things is going to be as big as everyone kind of thinks it's going to be, there needs to be some sort of network that's capable of handling the amount of transactions. So IOTA is not the only directed acyclic graph. It's just one of the leading ones when you look at market cap, which obviously doesn't mean too much, if anything at all. But it is one of the larger projects, more development on it than most others. So when it comes to like comparing IOTA structure over what we understand as the blockchain, there are trade-offs, like we've talked about. One is not necessarily more advanced than the other. IOTA, you can say this is more advanced because it's more complicated, I guess. But there's something to be said about simplicity, and it's hard to keep something so simple yet working without making it too advanced. So different applications are kind of suited for each one of the networks. You can't say like, well, this is overall better. Well, for some things it is, some things it isn't. So, and the tangle's pretty, is largely untested, right? Bitcoin's untested, and it's been around for 10 years now. So, I couldn't imagine what you could say about IOTA because, it's been around for less than half of that. So when you have IOTA, you have this combination of all these new different technologies and all these new mathematical solutions that were never implemented before together, right? So regardless of the problems and concerns about the network, it's arguably a very good step forward in decentralized exchange of value. No matter what you say about it, it's still interesting experiment, just like every other cryptocurrency. I think it needs to be had. It's interesting to see how this plays out. And regardless of the problems that, the network has, it's only going to be time. Time is the only thing that's going to be we're going to be to see if this network can actually grow and reduce the role of the, coordinator node, kind of grow in adoption, security, and overall, I think it's going to be interesting to see.